With how many names of Western politicians are being revealed in the Epstein files, the Chinese Communist Party and other political opponents of the West have to be taking one of the best political wins of the decade, of the generation. Since Mao took power, they've been talking about the corruption in the West and how deep that runs within the governments of America and Western Europe. And now they have a list of names of Western politicians and royal families who are so interconnected with this ring of corruption.
There's a really comforting fact to know that you have people fearless enough to challenge the status quo or the global world order, which is being dictated by America. Because imagine living in a world where you're being controlled and manipulated by people like Jeffrey Epstein. And China's always been skeptical of very powerful people in the West. A great example is George Soros. George Soros is a very controversial financier, wherein he makes a lot of money by wrecking economies, wrecking markets. That's what they did with the Bank of England. That's how he made $1 billion.
If you hate socialism or unions or China, you are politically aligned with Jeffrey Epstein. It'd probably be smart to consider the things that Jeffrey Epstein didn't like as probably pretty good, because that man was pretty clearly evil.
So many Western people, they like to say, oh, we just hate Chinese government, we don't hate Chinese people. Thank you. China's history, China's culture, and China's political system has been demonized by Western culture, Western politicians, and the Western media for decades. Why? Because they know China is the most powerful culture and political system in humanity since history.
Those rich white male billionaires didn't do the things that you're seeing in the Epstein files because of Satan. It's not the devil, it's not the devil's influence, it's not voodoo, it's not any of these spiritual, untangible things that people are claiming that it is. This is in fact the ultimate goal of the systems that we live under. The systems of patriarchy and capitalism were set up and intertwined in such a way so that this kind of thing could happen.
There is a story of influence that was written for China, a blueprint for control, drafted in boardrooms and on private islands. But this is the story of how that blueprint failed. This is about the systems, the walls, and the relentless campaigns that created what some call the unbreakable code.
America always talks shit about China, but China barely talks about America at all. It's a bit embarrassing, don't you think? You spend all your time hating on someone and they don't even bother to mention you. America gets no shout-outs in China's latest 5-year plan. All China says, obliquely, is a profound shift is taking place in the international balance of power, while America violently loses its shit about the same situation. China continues, breakthroughs are accelerating in the new round of technological revolution and industrial transformation, while America is deindustrializing Europe and trying to defibrillate its own economy with the AI bubble that's about to go heart attack economic explosion. These nations are not the same, and you can see it on the page. China is sticking to its vision, while America is lashing out in a blind rage. In response to America's retardation and Europe's deindustrialization and the whole white empire's disintegration, China's open position is, all this has created positive factors enabling China to make proactive moves in the international arena and shape a favorable external environment. Or as Napoleon said, when your opponent is defeating themselves, don't interrupt. While the white empire is distracted to disintegration with multiple land wars in Asia, China is fighting no one and focused on improving life for its own citizens. This leads to very different outlooks and very different documents. American policy documents are very empire-focused, while China is literally minding their own business. As Chairman Xi said in his notes on the 5-year plan, we must work to strengthen the domestic economy and boost domestic economic flows so as to leverage the stability of the domestic economy as a hedge against uncertainties in the international economy. While America is trying to tax everyone else's economy through tariffs, though Americans end up paying them, China is just trying to develop their own country. What a novel policy. While America is trying to bomb other people's infrastructure to smithereens, China is building, including in other countries. These are very different visions. Of course, China does talk about America indirectly. We all know who they're talking about when they say, we should promote an equal and orderly multipolar world and foster a new type of international relations. And we all know who they're opposing when they say, we must resolutely oppose all hegemonic, high-handed, and bullying acts. However, China does not name names, which for America is a bit embarrassing. The fact is that there's no great power competition this century. There's a great cannibalization of the white empire as America devours Europe and its vassals, and on the other hand, a great liberation of Asia as China, Russia, and Palestine rebel, either violently or silently, as in China's case. They're simply not talking about America at all.
So many Western people, they like to say, oh, we just hate Chinese government, we don't hate Chinese people. Thank you. China's history, China's culture, and China's political system has been demonized by Western culture, Western politicians, and the Western media for decades. Why? Because they know China is the most powerful culture and political system in humanity since history. China 70 years ago, after all the tragedy, World War II, Qing dynasty, the slavery system, 70 years later, China became superpower. There are 74 critical technology. 66 is led by China. 70 years, China came from poverty to become today. That shows you how powerful China's culture and the Chinese government is. People may say, oh, that because Chinese people work hard. No. American people also work hard. Some of them work 3 jobs to survive. So if you want to criticize Chinese government, I just begging you to look your own shit first. Mind your own business. Okay, Chinese government got 95% of Chinese support. You don't like our government, you don't like us. And we know you don't like us. You don't need to lie. Being a hypocrite is very annoying. Like, I don't like you guys. I never lie about it.
To understand China's defense, you must first understand its internal war. Since 2012, China hasn't just prosecuted corruption, it has engineered a systemic purge on a scale unseen in modern history. The Tigers and Flies campaign, led by the CCDI, is not merely a legal exercise, it's a political and ideological safeguarding operation. Targeting over 2.3 million officials, the campaign dismantles networks that could become vulnerabilities. The insight from analysts who've studied this is profound. It functions as both a deterrent and an immune response. When a senior banking regulator or a provincial party secretary falls, it sends a shockwave through the system, reinforcing that no position is insulated. This aggressive internal policing serves a dual purpose. It maintains public legitimacy by addressing graft, but more critically for a narrative, it systematically eliminates the very entry points, the compromised officials, the friendly contacts, that foreign intelligence agencies or influence operatives historically rely on to gain leverage. The system is designed to be hostile to external co-option by first being ruthless to internal decay.
If you hate socialism or unions or China, you are politically aligned with Jeffrey Epstein. It'd probably be smart to consider the things that Jeffrey Epstein didn't like as probably pretty good, because that man was pretty clearly evil. And pretty much everything he was responsible for or supported was horrible. He was a PDF file. He was a child murderer. He was best friends with Donald Trump. He was apparently responsible for poll on 4chan and microtransactions in Call of Duty. There's nothing good about him. But he hated socialism, and he hated the country that's pulled 800 million people out of poverty and holds billionaires accountable. They execute corrupt politicians and the billionaires who bribe them, and they execute PDF files. Jeffrey Epstein would get double executed in China. So if there's ever been a black and white moral guidepost you could consider following, you can't do much better than what wouldn't Jeffrey Epstein do?
It's kind of easy to understand why they're so hell-bent against China and communism. Makes sense.
The second layer of defense exists in the realm of ideas and information. China perceives unchecked Western cultural and political influence not as mere exchange, but as a cultural threat to its stability and developmental model. This is where the famous Great Firewall is just the most visible part of a vast apparatus. The state maintains strict sovereignty over its digital and media landscape, not just to censor dissent, but to control the narrative and prevent the seeding of ideologies that could erode party authority. The personal insight from journalists and scholars who track this is that it creates a fundamentally different information ecosystem. A scandal or narrative that might explode in the West through social media and topple institutions is contained, reframed, or silenced within China's borders. This control extends to education, entertainment, and finance, limiting the vectors through which foreign values or operational tactics, like those used by figures seeking leverage through media manipulation, can take root. The goal is stability through managed exposure, creating a societal immune system that is suspicious of and resilient to foreign ideological viruses.
I just saw a video of a doctor who discovered the cure for pancreatic cancer begging for funding for people to donate to his campaign to move his research into clinical trials. I think most Americans know that basic necessities should not be, existing in the context of a profit motive and with shareholder value and all of this other stuff. They understand that capitalism is wrong. But I don't think they understand what the cure for capitalism is, and that the cure for capitalism is also the cure for cancer. It's also the cure to the billionaire Epstein pedophile class. It's the cure for Nazis. It's the cure for modern day far right-wing conservatism. And it's the cure for all of the things that materially impact your life. Walking around in China as revelations people have sort of had in the context of the Epstein files is a really surreal experience. Infrastructure here is something that you can't literally fathom. If I were to break my leg right now on the street, I would be able to get to a hospital very quickly because there's one very nearby here and there's one very near most populations. There's a high concentration of hospitals in China. And my ability to get healthcare without insurance would probably be somewhere around the $10 to $20 range. That is as a foreigner with no insurance. And there are a lot of leftists, Western leftists, who say that China is not communist. And I think this comes a lot from illiteracy and a complete misunderstanding of Marx in general, and also massive propaganda campaigns carried out by Epstein himself. This, of course, includes the fact that Noam Chomsky really infused his own political inclinations into the American education system, which Epstein had access to. Some of the most decorated professors in the United States are in the Epstein files. There is a Harvard professor in there, and you don't think that your perception of communism, your misreadings of the literature are, just that, misreadings and like inaccurate representation. Meanwhile, China has some of the highest investments in academics. They teach Marxism, Marxist-Leninism, literally from the beginning of your education. You learn Marxism at every grade level since you are from a young student, and you think that like the average Chinese person doesn't have a better grasp on what communism is than any Western professor. And I say all this to say that this like experience of like watching people live their lives here, like if I go outside right now in China, it's 8:27 p.m. It's very, very dark outside, as you can see, and I can go into a back alley and strike up a conversation with some strange figure in the dark, and I will be perfectly safe. The other day before coming to China, I was outside and I saw a man stalking a 14-year-old high school girl, and I live in a college town. One of the safest college towns in the United States, by the way. I think the entire American public is desensitized by the American pedophile billionaire class because really a lot of their political ideology has been infused in the American culture. Being catcalled is normal. I've not been catcalled once in China. And I'm out on these streets. Like I go outside to go get my food and everything. And there hasn't been a single time that I've gone outside in the United States and I've felt safe. There's always a killing nearby at the local train station. There's literally always a school shooting. There's always something happening. There's always danger. And more importantly, if something were to happen to me, my ability to fix the issue and go to the doctor is so undermined by the cost that it's impossible for me to achieve these things. And this made me think of a TikTok that another girl made where she said that Epstein was made into a billionaire. He was not always, a part of the billionaire elite classes. And it was because he was providing a service. And I think it's interesting that at the highest levels of government, we have the billionaire class, the political elite really invested in this sex trafficking ring, pedophile sex trafficking ring, which extends the entirety of the country, which reaches across the Western world, and which is well invested too. And a part of that really truly is funded by your taxes. Because if you don't think that the entire American political and economic structure is hijacked by these billionaire pedophiles, and you'd be wrong. The military is directly under the control of the president, as is the National Guard, as is ICE, etc. These are all organizations that are under the direct control of the president, including the CIA and the FBI, and Epstein and, all of the political elites are in the Epstein files discussing coups and such towards countries in particular who are communist, who actually are providing services of healthcare and such. And I think you have to look at this as a wider structural effort by the billionaire and the political elites to ensure that there's a desperation of poverty to create more compliant victims and to create more systemic abuse. Because I also can't help but think about this in the context of sex work and like how legitimate workers who are there with consent are heavily criminalized. And so they try to push them out to create non-consensual trafficking victims because these sex workers directly threaten the industry that they are partaking in. And anyway, I don't really know what to make of all of this other than, hopes that the American public can really wake up to communism, though I don't have a lot of hope in that. But I mean, maybe there is a chance. People elected Mamdani after all, but you will not catch me advocating for a Democrat or a Republican. Ever. I mean, I've already never advocated for a Republican, but much less a Democrat now.
With how many names of Western politicians are being revealed in the Epstein files, the Chinese Communist Party and other political opponents of the West have to be taking one of the best political wins of the decade, of the generation. Since Mao took power, they've been talking about the corruption in the West and how deep that runs within the governments of America and Western Europe. And now they have a list of names of Western politicians and royal families who are so interconnected with this ring of corruption. And also just horrific actions, right? If the CCP wants to tell their own domestic population and their international sphere of influence about how their ideologies and about how their way of governance is better and less morally corrupt than the West, they got it. The sitting US president is complicit in and engaged with multiple crimes that are listed in those files. His name is all over the files. And the imperialist capitalist system that put him into power is now curated to protect him while in power despite those crimes. That is a system that does not serve the people. And it needs restructuring down to the core basis of it. The Americans have to deal with that. How horrible of a system.
This brings us to the cornerstone of China's external defense, the rigid, non-negotiable principle of non-interference in internal affairs. While Western nations often employ a toolkit of pressure, sanctions tied to human rights, public shaming campaigns, support for civil society, China flatly rejects this framework as illegitimate interference. This is not a passive policy, it's an active shield. By refusing to engage on these terms and counterattacking with accusations of hypocrisy and neocolonialism, China neutralizes a primary Western pressure tactic. The real story here is how this principle interacts with the anti-corruption drive. When a foreign entity, be it a corporation or an individual with dubious intent, attempts to use financial inducements to gain influence, they are not just committing a crime, they are violating China's political sovereignty. The state can then frame its crackdown not just as law enforcement, but as an act of national defense. This fusion of anti-corruption with counter-espionage makes traditional lobbying or influence peddling, often legal in the West, an exceptionally high-risk endeavor in China.
There's a really comforting fact to know that you have people fearless enough to challenge the status quo or the global world order, which is being dictated by America. Because imagine living in a world where you're being controlled and manipulated by people like Jeffrey Epstein. And China's always been skeptical of very powerful people in the West. A great example is George Soros. George Soros is a very controversial financier, wherein he makes a lot of money by wrecking economies, wrecking markets. That's what they did with the Bank of England. That's how he made $1 billion. He tries to do the same thing in Asia through Hong Kong. But once he was caught by China, he was immediately banned by China. So China's always been very skeptical. And the fact that if you have a country whose sole motive is only to make money, you don't have a shared culture, you don't have a shared identity, you are just bounded by the same goal of making a lot of money, then that country will not last very, very long.
Those rich white male billionaires didn't do the things that you're seeing in the Epstein files because of Satan. It's not the devil, it's not the devil's influence, it's not voodoo, it's not any of these spiritual, untangible things that people are claiming that it is. This is in fact the ultimate goal of the systems that we live under. The systems of patriarchy and capitalism were set up and intertwined in such a way so that this kind of thing could happen. The stuff you're seeing in the Epstein files is an extreme manifestation of the sexual violence that happens across all levels of society. Our society teaches that women and children's bodies are vehicles for male sexual pleasure. And the ritual and sexual abuse of women and children's bodies has been happening since the advent of patriarchy. In terms of history, this is nothing new. In fact, this is archaic. And that is because we are still living under the same system now that we did when sexual abuse towards women and children was commonplace. The patriarchy seeks to dehumanize women and reduce them to nothing but the property of a man, whilst capitalism seeks to make profit by all means necessary. The ultimate manifestation of the intersection of those two things would be a financially incentivized billion-dollar women and child sex trafficking ring. It's not the devil, it's not some outside force, it is the system that we live under. It's not that Epstein and his goonies were specifically deviant or that they were influenced by the devil. Men are socialized to want this. Most men would do this if they had the access and the resources and the chance that Epstein did. And that's nothing to do with men's inherent nature. It's how they are socialized, it's how they are taught, it's how the patriarchy views women as commodities, as non-humans, as just holes. And men are taught that women are just holes there for their pleasure. Things like age and consent don't matter because we're not human. And that is why you end up with global billion-dollar elitist sex trafficking rings. It is the ultimate manifestation of patriarchy and the idea of women and children as property and commodities. This kind of thinking is present in billionaire social circles and homeless encampments. And that is by design. It's not exclusive to the billionaires that we're talking about now. The language that you see these men using in the Epstein files to refer to the women and children that they're abusing is just the same as the language that you'll see any random misogynist use to refer to women. And those men are not influenced by the devil. They're influenced by patriarchy. And you can really see how influenced by the patriarchy this whole case is by the fact that the only person who's in prison for this is a woman.
So total control. Bannon is the gray, Jeff is the blue. Talking about China's total control, the plan of 10 years, and here we go. All consumers digitized. Oh, and this is actually the social coin or whatever it is that all Republicans and conservatives and MAGA were railing against. While in 2019, Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein were talking about it and planning on making it happen. So pause to read, but I'll read it. All consumers digitized, evaluated. They get points for certain behaviors. This is the next 10-year plan. They say if you want our 500 million people buying X, we want Y, and if, I don't know how to say it again, I said this other, Z, if the president says no Microsoft products, it's not like Donald asking people not to buy Toyotas. In China, the next day, no Microsoft products sell. Genius. Bannon says total control. Epstein says this move, the president has, or Z Chai Chi, I don't know who, I forget the name. Sorry, I know that sounds dumb, but it's late. I just want to get this out. Has moved party above government. Lots of tentacles. They used to be side by side. Bannon, total control. That's what we have going for us. 6 million in charge of 60 million in charge of 1.5 billion. I'm not sure what that means. And then it says Tom was, it says Tom, I'm not sure who Tom was. He did mention Tom Cotton and Kavanaugh, and that the lawyer, Trump's lawyer, was talking to the senators like for Kavanaugh. I don't know what that meant either. There's all of this really vague stuff that they're talking about, but with huge names. And basically, the Chinese government trying to convince like the world that democracy no longer works. So not good. And this was, again, almost 10 years ago. So imagine all, and Bannon is as much part of this administration now as he's ever been. He's on the podcasts. He's the golden boy. He's the golden. Like, you know, his connection throughout the world is absolutely insane. And wanting complete control over everything that we do. Palantir, Peter Thiel, Stephen Miller, all of them. And again, so when everybody says it's both sides, no. There is one side that is in power right now trying to take over everything. Project 2025, Project 2026, what was it? The other one about like women. I mean, it's happening right now. And they want total control. That's the thing.
The narrative of foreign influence meeting an unyielding wall is not about moral superiority, but about fundamentally different models of governance. China's approach, a fusion of ruthless internal discipline, ideological control, and the sovereign rejection of external pressure, creates the unique defensive architecture. It is a system built on the deep-seated fear of the Soviet-style collapse, where internal corruption and foreign ideological infiltration were seen as the fatal combination. The resolution for China has been to weld these two fronts together into a single, continuous campaign for party survival. The challenge this presents to the world is profound. It demonstrates that in the 21st century, geopolitical influence cannot be assumed. It must confront the internal logic and defensive mechanisms of a civilization state that has meticulously studied the fall of others and is determined to write its own, uninterrupted story.